Welcome to the Open to Hope Show. I'm your host, Dr. Heidi Horsley, and we are in partnership with the Association for Death Educators and Counselors. And I'm here today to talk about From Grief to Peace. I love this title because when my brother died and my dad died, I didn't think it was possible to have peace again. I didn't know how I was going to get there. And we're going to talk today with 3 therapists who are very involved in the grief and loss world and experts in the field about how we get from grief to peace. So I'm going to introduce them. We're going to start with Dr. Wendy Lichtenthal. Wendy has been on shows before with us. You can go to opentohope.com to see those. She is a psychologist, the director of the Center for the Advancement of Bereavement Care at the Sylvester Comprehensive Cancer Center. She is associate professor, pending rank at the University of Miami Miller School of Medicine. Wendy has been at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center since 2005, where she was founding director of the Bereavement Clinic, and now she is a consultant faculty there. She also works for on a federally funded research grant in the area of grief and loss. Welcome, Wendy. Next to Wendy is Gina Maffa, who has also been on our show before. Gina is a licensed psychotherapist, mental health counselor, and media consultant in New York City. She has been in practice for nearly 2 decades and has helped hundreds of people seeking treatment for trauma and grief. She has authored the book, Moving On Doesn't Mean Letting Go. Welcome, Gina.
Thank you so much.
And next to Gina is Heather Stang. Heather was the inspiration for the show today because she is the author of Grief to Peace. She is also the author of Mindfulness and Grief and the guided journal From Grief to Peace. Heather hosts the Mindfulness and Grief podcast and offers mindfulness-based grief support online through her organization, the Mindfulness Grief Institute. Heather facilitates an online support program that includes meditation, grief yoga, and journaling. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you for having me back.
So I guess the first question I have for you, Heather, is why did you write the book From Grief to Peace?
So From Grief to Peace is a guided journal.
Okay.
And it is grounded in the 8-step mindfulness and grief system that I created through researching client feedback, through leading yoga and meditation and journaling workshops, and as a thanatologist, I have my master's in death, dying, and bereavement. So I took a lot of my life experience as well as the information I was given and my observations of clients, and I built what I think of as a framework or a trajectory. Now we know it's very dangerous territory if we say we're going to give people steps or stages, right? But this is really a self-care process.
Okay.
And so the idea is taking a very broad look at how people experience grief. And so most people, that early experience of loss is dysregulating and overwhelming. There's a lot of anxiety. There's fear. Like, how am I going to get through this? How am I going to do this? And hopefully the outcome, and that word peace can be a little tricky, so I kind of think of it's like the title of your show and foundation, Open to Hope. What I hope to do in this book is to give people the hope that they can get to a place where they have what we like to call in mindfulness circles equanimity, which is kind of a calm and steady mind, even in the wake of deep pain and suffering. That ability to tend with compassion to what hurts, which is very different from, spiritually bypassing or ignoring or just trying to force yourself to be peaceful.
Okay, so I have another question to you that relates to your book. You talk about mindful awareness. Can you tell us what that actually means?
I will, but I'd like to preface it with the idea of conscious relaxation.
Okay.
There's a lot of popular practices out there that are mindfulness and open awareness, which is great. But what mindful awareness is about being present and being steady in the present.
Okay.
That's a big ask when you're early in loss, and I know this for myself because even after I was doing this work, I had a major loss where my stepfather died, and the idea of being mindful was just so foreign. So we really try to start with teaching people, and also coming back to teaching myself, how to control where your attention goes.
Okay, I like this, because where your attention goes, it flows, right?
Yeah. So where does your attention normally go when you're grieving? It goes to the loss story, it goes to the pain, which is important to tend to, But the first thing I like to teach people how to do, not all the time, but when they need it, is to give their mind a place to rest. So repeating a word over and over, or counting, or walking. There's many ways of helping the body shift out of that state of overwhelm and anxiety and into at least a neutral place.
So I like what you're saying. Walking.
Anything really, biking, jogging, knitting. I really want people to lean into the tools they already have, and the passions that they have, and even if they're feeling a little disconnected from it, to actually do something, right? For some people, going back to something they love is great, but for many of us, and I'll use myself as an example, I mentioned when my stepdad died, I could not just sit and meditate, which was my passion. So I had to find another way to trick my mind into taking a break. And so one thing I would use is hitting tennis balls against a wall, which sometimes was a way to focus and give my mind a break, and sometimes it was a way for me to express the anger. So all of these tools can be used in different ways.
It kept you in the moment, and it was mindful. So I'm wondering, what comes up for you when you are hearing this, Gina? I know you've had a loss with your mom, and you also work with clients around mind-body connections.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I think is always so confusing to my clients is the idea that grief is a full body experience, and that, we don't just feel it from the neck up. And so, when it comes to kind of being present, there's a balance between asking somebody to be with something, or to be present at the very least, either with a feeling or just in the present moment, versus being distracted. A lot of my clients will say, well, I'm going to be present and I'm going to watch an entire season of whatever I want on Netflix. And so in that way, I sort of try to let them lead too, because it can be a really overwhelming experience and be a full body experience. But I do believe that getting the body involved and being as present as we can with our body, even if it's just putting your hand on your heart and asking, what do I need right now?
Well, I like that idea.
Just what do I need right now, or what do
good.
you need right now? It's just an easy place to start sometimes.
I like that idea. And Wendy?
A couple things are coming up for me. One is just with the idea of having equanimity and as well as struggles, is just this notion that in the work that we do, which is called meaning-centered grief therapy, coexisting with the grief through connection to things that matter. So related to that, the other thing that comes up for me is that all the things that could be recommended to do is still living. I try to actually stay away from the word distraction altogether, right? Because it implies we can't handle feelings. It implies we need to get away from feelings. I love the idea of giving the mind a rest and then engaging in life in a different way. So hitting tennis balls is engaging in life. You are still living. I think a lot of times people, when they feel, there's often this sense that I feel like I'm just surviving, I'm not living, right? This notion that people in earlier moments of grief are feeling, or not just early, I mean this can go on for some time, but anything you do is part of life, and it might be just what you need in that moment, and that's okay. But that's what was coming up for me, is that's not a distraction, it's a place to put your attention. That's another dimension of life to tend to, and that can be meaningful.
Absolutely, and I think there's an important concept in grief theory called the dual process model of the bereavement, right? Where the idea here, and this is something many of us have experienced, on our own, is that we spend our time going back and forth between tending to the loss and tending to life, right? And we go back and forth. And some of the time you're going to be really focused on the pain of loss. And unfortunately, sometimes people feel that that's where they need to be all the time, right? There can be a sense like, if I move over here and I'm not paying attention, that I'm somehow dishonoring the relationship or whatever. And I know everybody on this panel, and you included, want to tell people sometimes you need a breathing room, and that's not about dishonoring the relationship. It's about giving yourself time to re-engage. So a big part of what From Grief to Peace does is it helps them dip in and out of those two processes. Some of the time the journaling prompts are about diving into memories or looking at a photo and finding something in that photo you've never noticed before and writing about it. Other times it's about, what describes something you enjoy doing. And so this kind of comes to your first question, what is mindfulness? Mindfulness is about letting whatever is naturally arising in. It's not about forcing yourself to not feel something. If something big comes up, you tend to it. If nothing is happening, you notice that. And I think there's a lot of misinformation out there that mindfulness is just about a calm and clear mind.
Right.
And I remember asking my teacher when I was first learning, I said, what do you do if something hard comes up? And he goes, why you pay attention to it? And I'm thinking, what? Like, that sounds scary. But there are techniques that I share in my books and in practices, and that grief therapists can share to help you approach the hard stuff in a safer way.
I like this. Something that you said earlier that I wanted to comment on too was when you talked about the dual process model and said people feel guilty if they are not, when they take breaks from their grief or when they're doing something else. And I worked for 10 years with firefighter families that had lost someone in 9/11 on a research study. And one of the things that we did is that the homework assignment was called Family Fun Time. And we would have the families go and do something fun together so that they could take a break from talking and living and being in these grief spaces. And because it was the homework, they felt obligated to do it. They felt less guilty about doing it. And over time, those moments of family fun time got longer and longer and longer. Right. So.
And I think one of the things that we've been discussing, I think, us off camera and on, is this idea from, what your book talks about and my book and your work, is that this doesn't mean you're moving, this isn't letting go, right? This isn't forgetting them.
Yes.
It's a transformation of how you relate to your grief. And my mission in life is to give people as many tools as possible so they can learn what works for them wherever they are on any given day with their grief.
I love that, Heather. And so I want to switch gears for a minute. We are still on your book, and I love everything that you're saying here. You talk about getting unstuck. And I want to know what exactly that means.
So it's a little bit of a tricky couple words there.
Okay.
When I say getting unstuck. Many people who are grieving feel they are stuck.
Yes,
but
absolutely.
many of them are not actually stuck. You know that saying, time flies when you're having fun?
Yeah.
It really slows down when you're grieving, doesn't it? And when things are hard. And so what I do in the section where I talk about getting unstuck is to really help people find ways to not just focus on the part that feels stuck, but to widen their awareness. This is where mindfulness comes in, to what else is going on. So one analogy I often use is if you have a truck stuck in the mud, on the side of the road, and you keep hitting the gas, and the tires keep spinning, that truck never moves. You have to take the mats from the floorboards and put them under the truck, or maybe you need to call in someone. It's very similar to that. If you keep doing the same thing over and over again, and you feel like you're not making any movement, it might be time to try something else. But I don't want people to feel like, if they are experiencing that felt sense of stuck, I want to let them know that this is a valid feeling, but it's also part of the grief process. It takes work and time, right?
So Gina, what comes up for you about getting unstuck when you hear what Heather's saying?
Well, Heather and I have a very similar bend, so in a lot of ways, I really identify with what you're saying. Because I work with younger people who have a little bit, as they would say, a shorter attention span and a desire to sort of move faster. A lot of it to me is a little bit of a magician's journey and finding what works individually. And that may mean that I really pay close attention to the relationship. But when somebody is saying they feel stuck in something, whether it's an emotion or an experience or a memory, it's important to understand why, where it's coming from. But I also want to sort of change the attention, whether that means looking at things that are going well or relationships that are positive or a different sort of angle of the loss or a different angle of their life. Sometimes it takes that one moment, which could be an interweave, so to speak, that can get us sort of back on track and get some more momentum. And I think sometimes when we pay too close attention on something, more pressure adds up, and then we get fixated on it. And I think that's not the positive attention that we want on it. So it's a little bit of it's a navigation.
Yeah, I think that summarizes kind of this paradox of doing grief work, right? On one hand, we want to allow the natural process of grief to unfold, and on another hand, we want to provide tools. And one thing that is so hard to articulate is how much time we spend focusing on our individual clients, right? And Wendy's correct, there are some people who do actually get stuck. It's not the majority of people.
Well, and sometimes when we offer tools, the clients will say, "You're not listening to me. This is really hard and I'm not in a good space," and they need us to back up a little bit and validate and acknowledge and not minimize what they're going through. It's a dance. We're going back and forth between offering tips and tools and coping skills and then validating and acknowledging what they've been through.
Absolutely, and I think any good grief therapist is going to allow the client to lead in most cases, and you don't offer a tool until there are cues, clues, or that they're there. Yeah. And that's part of why I developed this framework. I tell people you don't have to, you're going to probably dip in and out, right? And there's a thing I call the inevitable.
Okay.
And it's a statement, I'll find out if you two hear it all the time, where someone says, "But I was doing so well." It's an inevitable. And when they say that, that's when maybe they've felt some progress, some spaciousness, some hope, and then something happens or nothing happens, right? And they feel like they're back to square one. And in that space, for me, it's my job to validate that feeling, to remind them you've done a lot of work and maybe right now is the time to rest, or whatever it is that they need.
That grief is not linear.
Grief is not linear.
That you saw a movie, you saw the place you guys used to go, the song came on the radio, it's the anniversary is approaching.
Any of it, that grief is not linear, and so that's today, but that's still movement.
It's still movement. Like the fact that you even recognize, this is what I love about I was doing so well, is they recognize they were doing whatever well looks like for them.
Whatever well looks like
whatever it looks like for them, because well does,
we don't define
we
it.
don't define well. Well, but those words are just so frequent, and I'm like, well, that means you notice shift.
Yeah,
right?
and that's what grief is.
Tell me more about what that feels like. And sometimes that's when I invite people to go back and do a journal review, if that's appropriate, where, pick up your journal when we first started working, highlight, underline, and then, what stood out to you from this.
Well, that's why I like journaling, because sometimes you think you haven't moved, you think you're stuck.
Yeah.
And I have clients that come in, I know you all do it, that say, "I'm in the same place I've always been." It's like, no, you're not. And when they go back into their journal, they're like, "What?
Right.
There was a time I couldn't even put on my earrings because I was in such a bad space. I am not back where I was. It just feels like it right now." Yeah. What is coming up for you, Gina, as we're speaking? Because I'm noticing your body language saying, yes, okay.
Yes, and also, sometimes I have clients who notice their growth by seeing something negative. So it'll be sometimes a family encounter or going back home for the holidays at college, and they'll say, I'm so triggered by something, or something's really activated in me that I don't identify with anymore. That maybe my mother used to say something that I would feel okay with, and now I don't. She said something that reminded me of some of my loss in a different way. And so it's really interesting how sometimes that can show the progress, right? When I went home, I saw something else, so now I can see my progress because something was activated in me that showed me that I'm not in that place anymore, but perhaps they are. And that can be painful, but also really show us that there is movement. And sometimes it just doesn't come in the likely ways or the more obvious ways.
I like that point. Okay, Heather, allowing transformation.
Yeah.
What is that? What is that about?
And again, just like everything else, the client leads, right? So I'll give you an example. I had a client who was very excited and thought that her husband would be very proud of her when she was tackling some pretty extensive yard work, like stuff I wouldn't even, chainsaws and, and so I asked her, tell me more, how did that feel? Well, of course she still misses her husband and loves him. And she's like, I was talking to him the whole time I'm doing this crazy stuff. And I'm like, I hope you were also paying attention. And she was, right? But, okay, just think back to how you were, when we first started talking. And she's like, wow, I've really gotten brave, That's the transformation. And so allowing that to happen. A lot of the languaging I use when I'm working with myself, when I self-mentor, or with my clients, things like invite, consider the possibility, being open, not saying, how have you grown? Because to me, if somebody said that to me, I'd feel like that's a little back off, right? But just invite yourself to recognize the ways you've changed. That's what allowing transformation is all about. And in my books, that's actually the 7th of the 8th modules, of the 8 modules. And a lot of it is grounded in the work by Calhoun and Tadici on post-traumatic growth.
We've had them on a podcast.
Okay, so, a lot of us are familiar with their work, but looking at the different domains, I feel like I get to cheat a little because, I'm teaching compassion. Meditation is the third lesson. So at some point along the way, just the way my group members are with each other, they're so loving and caring. Allowing transformation, they're usually very quickly able to say, well, I can feel more compassionate to somebody who's grieving, and maybe even they, feel more compassionate
because
to themselves.
We do change in profound ways, and there is, like you said, post-traumatic growth, and the research does support that. Okay, so we are about to wrap up, so I want to ask all of you one last question. Wendy, we'll start with you. What advice would you have for someone right now that just doesn't feel like it's possible to have peace or to find hope again?
I think building on what we've talked about today, it is really at the definition of the griever. And so I would invite them to think about that permission to grieve and be with the feelings and recognize their own capacity to decide, to choose their response to their grief, to find the agency in that, to decide what peace is, what well feels like, and to think about a model of coexisting with the grief where it's not an either or but an and kind of experience. And to understand that there is capacity for finding meaning both in their grief and in their lives again. And I'm happy to connect with people who are interested in learning more about our approach with meaning-centered grief therapy.
I love that. Gina?
I think that when people are in that place, it's really important to take it down to basics. And for me, it would just be to concentrate on the moments that we can be present with, whether that's drinking enough water, whether that's getting some movement, whether that's being in nature, getting enough rest, because those things seem silly, when we think about the grief experience, but they're the things that go by the wayside. And when we're thinking about how to find meaning or grow or get unstuck or get through this, we often get very lofty and we forget about our basic needs. And so that's where I would start.
And And that's actually the first lesson is it has things in there like drinking water and moving, those real basics. So I agree with what both of you said. So I'm going to just throw in a third. None of us could do this work as professionals, and support people if we did not know that there's going to be hope and change and peace. And so while that's, if you're early in loss and just hearing the words hope and peace feel cringy, just trust us that we know the process and that we're going to listen to you and find a way to help you grieve in your way, and that humans would not still be here if we were not able to learn how to integrate our life after loss.
I love that. Absolutely. Wendy, where do people find you if they're watching the show and want to connect?
Sure. So my email is wendy.lichtenthal, that's LICHTENTHAL, @miami.edu. I'm on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and you could just type in my name, my full name. And you can, for our study on meaning-centered grief therapy, you can email us at parentstudy, that's one word, @mskcc.org.
Great. Gina?
I'm going to simplify it. You can find all of my handles on my website, which is just ginamaffa.com.
Great.
If you are interested in learning more about how to move from grief to peace, I offer an online grief support program at meditationforgrief.com, and that's called Awaken. And I have a lot of journaling articles and self-care tips for grief at mindfulnessandgrief.com. I definitely do my best work over at Meditation for Grief because that's where I work directly with people.
Great, thank you. And thank all of you so much for helping people find hope after loss, for the work that you all do. You've had personal losses and you've gone on to be professionals in the fields. And Heather, I want to tell everybody out there to please go get the book, From Grief to Peace, because it is possible, even though, like you said, it may not feel like it right now. And visit opentohope.com if you want to see more of these podcasts or more cable shows. Everything on our site is free. And we would like to let you know that if you've lost hope, please lean on ours until you find your own, and God bless.
The loss of a loved one can leave you feeling depressed, angry, alone, lost. But you don't have to face this journey on your own. Open to Hope is a free community for anyone who has experienced loss. Find support. Find help. Find hope. Give grief a voice at opentohope.com.